Good morning. For those of you that might be a guest this morning, my name is Mike Bickley. I serve Jesus on staff here at Journey, and we're in a series where we're looking at God's design for families specifically. And the 2 weeks prior to this morning's message, we addressed those verses in 1 through 7 that you saw on the screen, addressing the husbands living with their wives in an understanding way, showing them honor. And then we talked about the wives submitting to their husbands and living with them in a respectful way. And what we want to do this morning is we want to talk about conflict, because what's inevitable in marriage is conflict. What's inevitable in families is conflict. What's inevitable in churches is conflict. What's inevitable in every kind of relationship? Conflict. We got somebody back there who's very wise. And so this morning, we want to look at Peter turning to everybody, husbands, wives, children. He's turning to everyone in the church, and he's saying there is a better way to do conflict than the natural way. It's to pursue the peaceful way. And so we hope this morning to unpack those verses 8 through 12. And as we do that, I want you to think about the reality that there is a pattern that can disarm hostility. And we want to take a look at that. Now, I would say that most people kind of have a fairy tale view of life and marriage when they're growing up and when they're young. And we all hope that we would live happily ever after. And probably the epitome of the fairy tale marriage was Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. They might have been married in what would be considered the most elaborate and romantic wedding ever to be remembered. They marched down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in London on July 29th, 1981. On the way to the church, they rode in an ornate and jewel-studded and gold-trimmed carriage. And as they did that, they went on a 2-mile route that had 4,500 pots of fresh flowers. So every few yards, there was a pot full of fresh flowers. Over 1 million Britons gathered along the streets of London, trying to catch a glimpse of Prince Charles and Lady Diana and the fairy tale couple on their way to a fairy tale wedding. It is said that there were over 2 billion people watching the ceremony on television. As they arrived at the church, this is a picture of them leaving, 2,500 people crowded into St. Paul's Cathedral. 75 technicians and 21 different cameras were enabling the world to participate alongside the couple. And this royal wedding, a lovely lady with a royal prince in a cathedral surrounded by adoring subjects. I mean, they were rich. They were young, handsome, beautiful. This was a marriage made in heaven. But the reality is that as much fun as some of the pictures show, it was soon discovered that a marriage made in heaven gets lived out on earth. And the fairy tale soon became a nightmare. And the couple grew very distant from one another. And rumors of affairs swirled, and the storybook marriage eventually collapsed into adultery and divorce. It takes more than a prince, more than a lady, more than a palace, and more than great wealth to make a great marriage. So what does it take to build a great marriage? What does it take for a relationship to withstand tough times and even outside attacks? What does it take for you and I in all kinds of relationships to remain healthy? This is where Peter gets very practical on how to disarm hostility and resolve conflict when it comes, because in all relationships it will come. So if you're here this morning and you're in a marriage relationship and you want a more joyous marriage, this message is for you. If you're here and you're not married yet, but you're here with your parents maybe, and you want a better relationship, then this message is for you. Whatever kind of situation you find yourself in with relationships that aren't as healthy as you desire, this message is going to give you practical advice, doable advice, workable advice that you can begin to implement today. But I want to warn you, Peter's answer to the hostility and anger of conflict is a supernatural way, not a natural way. It's not a worldly pattern, it's a heavenly paradox. So let's look at those verses again that Ian read for us. Finally, all of you, so everyone he's been addressing so far, all believers, especially those in the context of marriage and family, have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Do not repay evil for evil. Do not repay reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. To this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. And now he quotes Psalm 34, 12 through 16 as the basis for the exhortations he just gave. Another way of saying this is, hey, this isn't new advice. It comes straight out of the Old Testament scriptures. For whoever desires to love life and see good days. Does anybody in here desire to love life and see good days? Oh, just barely, just a little bit, Mike. He went like this, and I'm thinking, what, you want half a good life? Half a happy day? If you desire to love life and see good days, let him or her keep his or her tongue from evil. Let him or her keep their lips from speaking deceit. Let him or her turn away from evil and choose to do good. Let him or her seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Man, that verse 11 right there is so key. Let him or her turn away from the worldly patterns of doing evil and embrace the paradox of, in the midst of hostility and anger, of doing good. Let him or her seek peace and pursue it. In other words, Jesus' way to dissipate hostility is by bringing peace. Now, this sounds surreal. We live in the real world. Some of you are already dismissing me. You're wondering if you should be checking your, social media. I want you to hang with me. And I want you to grasp the beauty of what Jesus offers as a way to mend and heal and build healthy relationships. This idea of dissipating hostility with peace is not a worldly value, it's a biblical ideal. And when life gets tough and conflict arises, we're taught to stand our ground and get tough back. But the Bible actually gives us an opposite pattern to dissipate the hostility. And the first thing Peter tells us is that a hostile situation calls for someone who has a peaceful character, someone who has in the fabric of their heart, under the lordship of Jesus Christ, a desire in every instance to behave with a character that is peaceful. It doesn't take long in a conflict to get to battle stations. And it doesn't take long for us to find ourselves competing to win the argument, maybe even winning at all costs. Our world tells us that we should be driven, we should be task-oriented. And if we get harmed, we should seek revenge, we should retaliate. Our world tells us, be self-sufficient, be autonomous, don't let anybody get inside. Our society exalts the last man standing. But all of these things that society demonstrates and calls for are the actual things that destroy the intimacy we all long for. And so Peter is writing to a group of Christians in a persecuted environment where the stress and the pain has made its way into their lives, into their marriages, into their families, into the church. And he's calling them to have a character that's different than those in the world around them. In verse 8, he lists 5 virtues. The first one I've summarized by the word harmonious. It literally says have unity of mind. And what he is saying is that we are supposed to pursue harmony rather than our natural desire, which is to divide over an issue. Instead of proving someone else wrong, instead of drawing a line in the sand, we should seek peace. We should seek oneness. Instead of what will fire up, we should choose what will calm down. Instead of saying and doing something insensitive and cutting and that will push people away, instead we should seek for that which is sensitive and helpful and will bring people close. And then he says to be sympathetic, not calloused. Instead of insulating ourselves in difficult moments, in conflict, let's face it, all of us feel an immense amount of pain. And it feels very intense to us. And we feel our pain. But he's saying that in conflict, the person living under the lordship of Jesus Christ makes room in their heart for the other person's pain. They're sympathetic. They understand and embrace the pain of another. They don't have a calloused, indifferent heart. You know, if you and I are going to bring peace, then we're going to need sympathy. And then next, he calls us to be loving. He says brotherly love here. It's really one word in the original language, and it has this idea of that kind of deep friendship type of love, a love that wants the best for another person, not a kind of perspective that disregards another person. You know, oftentimes, in conflict, we can push people away. We can ignore them. We can discount them. We can dismiss them. And Peter says, no, in the midst of conflict, you need to draw in with a more intense and settled commitment for the affection and welfare of someone else. And then he says that we need to be tender-hearted, that we don't need to be defensive. You know, let's face it, in conflict, what do? We want to protect our rights. And we become defensive. And our first reaction to something someone shares is to defend ourselves. And he's actually saying our character should be one that wants to have a compassionate and tender affection and sensitivity towards the person who may be hostile towards us. And then lastly, he says, humble. Be humble in heart. Don't be arrogant in heart. You know, pride says that my rights, my feelings, my needs come first. Arrogance is thinking the world is all about Mike. But humility is concerned about others. It's concerned about their rights, their feelings, their hurts, their needs. And so really, the more intense the conflict, the more harmonious, sympathetic, loving, tender, and humble needs to be the character of the people in conflict. Can you imagine just if in conflict, all of the people involved were seeking harmony, sympathy, love, tenderness, and humility? No, you go first. You tell me all the things I did wrong. I'd like to hear that. And then you ask for forgiveness and you apologize and you own it. Like, can you imagine what our conflicts would be like if our character was of this nature? And again, I want to remind you, Peter is not calling for the natural character that you and I can muster from watching our families of origin or watching the world in which we live or the shows or the sound bites that we get. He's calling us to something that the Holy Spirit forges in us. And he really can only do it when we face conflict and realize our inadequacy and how we make things worse. And then we begin to pray for and seek after a character that looks like this. You know, we're taught to fuel conflict, not dissipate conflict. And so this kind of character, these virtues are things that we should extol and pursue and have others help us with. And that leads us to a second thing he says. An angry situation, or maybe an angry person, calls for you and I to have a peaceful response. The quicker anger rises, the more peaceful and calm you and I should become. And I want you to notice in verse 9 what he says. He says, do not repay evil for evil. Do not repay reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. And let's face it, when we're in conflict doing it the world's way, there's no blessing to be found. There's just agony and heartache. And so he says that the pattern of insult for insult, the pattern of evil for evil, doesn't work. The word evil there means to act in a malicious way that is harmful, destructive, or injurious to another person's welfare or interests. The word translated reviling means to call someone names. It means to insult their character. It means to throw out a verbal barrage that degrades and puts them down. And he says this pattern of you and I trading an evil for an evil or an insult for an insult in the midst of a fight is the kind of thing that may be the rule of war in the world, but is absolutely destructive to intimacy. I mean, and that's what we do, right? You're disappointed in me? Well, let me tell you how I'm disappointed in you. What do you mean I didn't take out the trash? You haven't cleaned the house in a year. What do you mean I'm insensitive? You never show me. We've all done it. You know, in premarital counseling, which my wife calls a refresher course for Pastor Mike, there's a conflict diagram that's very similar to this. And it basically talks about the way that we react in conflict demonstrates how important the issue is and how important the relationship is. And so you'll notice on the vertical axis over here, moving to the top, the arrow pointing up shows that the higher up part of the box demonstrates where the greatest concern for relationship is. On the bottom axis, the horizontal axis, that was the vertical, it's moving to the right. So the more important the issue is, then the right side of the box deals with that. So in a situation where someone has the lowest concern for the relationship and the least concern for the issue, they're just going to avoid the conflict, ignore the conflict, or completely withdraw. Now, if someone feels like the issue's really important, but they don't see the relationship as important, then they're going to win at all costs. I'm going to get my way. I'm going to get what I want. Now, what's interesting is you move up to where the relationship is very important. If the issue isn't that important to you personally, you just yield, you just accommodate, you just let that person have their way. Like if my wife comes to me and asks me of the 3 shades of blue, which one I like the best to paint the inside of the house, I really don't care. Like I'll let her choose the best. She knows way better than I do, but now if she comes to me with 3 shades of black for the house, I'll care. Like I don't want black walls inside my house, but I am going to yield in so many types of discussions that we have. And if we get into a place where the issue is very important and the relationship is very important, then we're going to have to figure out how to resolve it. For example, if you're a young married couple and you're discussing how many children you want to have after you've had 2 and one is done and one isn't, you got to resolve that conflict. And so this idea of resolution becomes critical. You know, compromise is in the middle. You and I might use another word, negotiating or discussing or working through. And learning that to get to resolution, many times there has to be something that can come as a win for both people. Stephen Covey called that the win-win situation. Now, what I want to just briefly say is that if someone is withdrawing in the darkest type of form, they will abandon their family or the person that they're in relationship with. And if someone is winning in the darkest way possible, they become abusive. And so if you find yourself where people have a pattern and you've been abandoned or you're being abused, you should get help. You should call the violence hotline, domestic violence hotline. You should call the police in a situation like that. You should then, no matter what you do, if you've been abandoned or you've been abused, and I've dealt with situations where husbands have been abused, wives have been abused, children have been abused, seniors have been abused. It's more common than we'd like to admit. You're going to need someone to help you work through whether reconciliation and the ability to restore the relationship is possible. So just a little something there, because we've been talking about relationships, and sometimes in the church it can feel like we don't need to talk about the ugliness that is taking place, but ugliness does take place. And I just want to tell you, I grew up in one of those ugly places, and Christ redeemed all people involved. And there is always hope in Jesus Christ. Now, what I would like to say is that as we work through this cycle of returning evil for evil, insult for insult, is a downward spiral. It always makes things worse. And when you get a little harsher, that's what we do, right? If somebody insults us with a 2, we feel it like a 3, so we insult back with a 4. And what happens is the spiral can get crazy. It can get out of hand, and you can even forget what started it. And before long, you got 2 people unloading on each other, saying things they should never say, doing things they should never do, because the cycle of payback is so ingrained and everyone loses. And so you and I must start the peaceful response. I think need to go. Okay, these are out of order. So let me give you this one. Yep, I have the same one twice. So now I'm going to write it, and I'm going to say break. Let's see, I'm going to have to use a different color. How about yellow? Break, can you read that? The payback cycle. Payback cycle, okay? You're going to break it. First thing you're going to do is you're going to break that cycle. Notice what he says. He says, do not repay. Don't do it. If somebody hurts you, do not hurt them back. If somebody curses you, do not curse them back. If somebody disappoints you, do not disappoint them back. He's saying, stop it. Just stop right there. Just halt. You have Christ in your heart. You don't have to respond in like kind. Do not, it's a command. Do not repay an evil for an evil. Do not repay a reviling for a reviling. Do not repay a hurt for a hurt. Do not repay in like kind. The word repay literally means to recompense in like kind, to pay it back. You know, and we extol that, right? Everybody that is a KU fan wants to beat K-State in football. Like, you know, and everybody that's a K-State fan wants to beat KU in basketball. It's supposed to be kind of humorous, but, you know, we have this desire of paying back our cross-state rival. We like movies where the people that are evil get what is due to them. And by the way, God is going to bring justice to this world and pay back the evil of this world. But you and I aren't supposed to pay back evil with evil or cruelty with cruelty. You know, I was going to do an illustration here, and then I realized that once I thought through it, it probably wouldn't work real well, so I'm just going to tell you what it was. I was going to have a table up here, and I was going to have a pitcher of clean water, I was going to have a tub of mud, and I was going to have a tub of manure. Yeah, I thought through this really well. So then I was going to get Mike to be my volunteer, and I was going to have Mike come up here, and I was going to say, hey, Mike, put some mud on your arm, okay? All right, you got mud on your arm. Probably don't want that on your arm. So why don't you wash that off? And I would offer him to take some manure, put it on his arm, and try to wash off the mud. Would that work? What if he just grabbed some more mud and tried to wash it off? Would that work? Why do we think that works in relationships? Why do we think more mud makes things cleaner? Why do we think that when someone gives us mud, if we give manure back, all of a sudden things are going to be better? See, that's the trick of the devil. And that's why Peter's being very clear. He said, you got to stop that. Somebody has got to stop the craziness. Somebody has to use clean water rather than mud. Somebody has to use clean water rather than manure. Again, Peter isn't asking for us to have a natural response to conflict like our world does. He's asking for us to have a supernatural, spirit-empowered reaction based in the strength and calling of Jesus Christ. And the way that we experience his blessing is when we stop the payback. And then he says, we're to do the contrary. Not only are we to stop payback, it's not enough in Jesus' eyes for you to just stop being mean back. He wants you to bless the person that's insulting you, the person who's attacking you, the person who's being hostile to you. Because in doing that, you will receive his blessing. This is a strong challenge. And when you read through these verses from the Psalms, I think there's a practical pattern here of what you and I can do. And these three things are mentioned in these verses that he quotes. But he talks about the blessing cycle, and then he quotes these verses. And in these verses, there's three things that you and I can do to start the blessing cycle. 3 steps. Number 1, say something positive. If you can't say something positive, be silent. But think of something positive you could say. And you might have to practice. Go back and review some of your most recent hurtful arguments. And where could you have inserted something healing? Where could you have inserted something positive instead of negative? Something that was pacifying, something that was hopeful. And then second, pray something supernatural. Have you ever noticed how little people want to pray during conflict? Have you ever noticed how little we pray ourselves during conflict? Do you think there's a reason for that? I do. I think the devil wants us moving away from God in our conflict, not moving toward God in our conflict. Pray for God to change your heart. Pray for God to change your speech. Pray for God to give you compassion. Pray for God to humble your heart. Pray for God to give you tenderness. And then third, do something gracious. So, that's the opposite of the payback. Do the opposite of a payback. So say that, someone is being mean to you, do something nice. Say that you're in a standoff and you're waiting for them to come to you. No, If you're going to do something gracious, you initiate with an apology first. Whether you think that's right or wrong, you do it because it's the right thing to do. Not in your natural heart, but in your relationship with God. Think about a relationship you're in right now, and think about these three things. You know, I always used to tell people case studies are so helpful, but you still got to do it in the real world. But you could practice. Think of something positive, think of a prayer, and think of an action that would be gracious and peaceful. If you're going to pursue peace, if you're going to seek peace, if you're going to run after peace, if you're going to hunt peace down, you're going to have a commitment to a pattern of not paying back and blessing instead. Seek peace and pursue it. You know, when our kids were young, we lived on a road that had a bend in it, and we were kind of worried about, it was a cut-through road, and we were worried about the traffic. And so we decided that we needed a fenced backyard. And so I went to the lumber store to figure out how much it was, and we ended up buying the lumber because there was such a great deal on it. The only thing was that the posts were about 1.5 feet too long, but they were cheaper than the right length posts. And so being the cheapskate I am, I bought the longer posts. And then after digging one hole with one of those handhold things, I realized this is never gonna work. So I asked my neighbors, like, would you want to help me? You know, I bought the lumber. They, oh, yeah, we'd be glad to. So we went and rented one of those 2-man motorized augers. You guys know what I'm talking about. And you put it in the ground, and the auger goes and cuts through, and it was really wet clay soil. We'd had a lot of rain. It was a lot of work, but with 2 of us pressing it down, we got our weight on it. We had to go all the way down to where almost the whole auger was in the ground. And what we discovered is that if you didn't start working that auger a little bit as it was going down, it would get stuck. And then we would have to turn the motor off, and the 2 of us would be working that auger till we could break it loose. Then we could restart it and back it out of the ground. And one of those days, we got one stuck, and it was stuck, and we worked it, and we couldn't work it, and we gave up. And we said, we're done with this auger, and we're gonna just go have lunch. So we went and had lunch, and then we realized we do have to return that at the end of the day. And probably returning it with the auger still stuck in the ground wasn't gonna get us our money back. So we worked hard, and we finally broke it loose because we just knew leaving it stuck in the mud just isn't the answer to the situation. We need to finish what we started because it didn't belong to us, it belonged to another, and we needed to return it. If you're here this morning and you are a Christ follower, the reason I'm telling you that story is you belong to another. You belong to Jesus Christ. And your relationship, if you want to think of it as an auger, man, it's a lot easier for you than the women, but it's stuck, and you do not have the option to just leave it. You don't have the option to return it broken. Your job, your responsibility, your calling is to get it unstuck and to reverse it and see if God can do a miracle and change the direction of your relationship. It only takes one. It only takes one person who refuses to pay back. It only takes one person who's willing to bless. It only takes one person who will pray supernatural prayers. It only takes one person to start the cycle, and then you never know what God can do. So if you're one of those people that you've kind of thrown in your towel, I want you to pick it back up. If you're the person who's closed the door, I want you to open it back up. If you're the person who's walked away, I want you to turn around, and I want you to go back. I strongly encourage that if you are in a relationship that has that kind of intensity, that you get some help from more mature Christians to come alongside you, to pour into you, to pray for you, and to hold you accountable to dissipating hostility with peace. Let me pray for you. God, we just acknowledge how important it is for us to do things your way, not our way, not the world's way, surely not the devil's way. But God, we just confess that in the midst of the pain, we often get vicious or we withdraw. God, help us not to be like our natural selves, but like the Christ who lives in us. We surrender afresh and choose this as the pattern for conflict, seeking peace and pursuing it, forging a character that is peaceful, choosing not to pay back, but to bless instead. God, would you do a miracle in our relationships as we practice your principles? It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.